Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world listening to this webinar. We're just going to there's still people coming in, but I think we'll get started. I've got a bit of an intro, and people can listen as more people are joining in. So thank you for joining this webinar. I'm Tony Ross. I'm the Director of Communications for Provalis Research. We have 2 more Lunch and Learns scheduled for June, and you can see the schedule and register on the learning/webinar section of our website. The title of today's presentation is Entity Extraction and Topic Modeling with WordStat. We are pleased to have with us today as our presenter, Dr. Derrick Cogburn. Derrick has 12 years experience working with QDA Minor and WordStat. He is Professor of Information Technology and Analytics at Kogod School of Business, American University, and Professor of International Communications and International Development, School of International Service, American University. Derrick is also a Faculty Director of the Internet Governance Lab at American University and Executive Director of the AU Institute on Disability and Public Policy. He teaches graduate courses on big data analytics and text mining using ProSuite and RStudio. Derrick has coordinated multiple United Nations workshops on text mining in international affairs, sustainable development goals, and CRPD implementation. He has published multiple articles and conference papers on text mining and has a new book coming out in the fall, published by MIT Press, entitled Researching Internet Governance. It includes a chapter on text mining with the ProSuite software package. Dr. Cogburn is also the managing member, president, and CEO of Praxis Analytics, LLC, offering consulting services in data science and text analytics. His contact information can be found on the training section of the Provalis Research website. Derrick is one of our trainers. At the end of this presentation, if you wish to ask questions, please send them to us through the chat feature, which can be found at the top right corner of your screen. We will take as many questions as time allows. I will now turn over the presentation to Derrick.
Thank you so much, Tony. I am absolutely delighted to be here for this Lunch and Learn session. I hope everyone has a good lunch and is ready to settle in and talk about some of the really exciting capabilities and features of the Provalis ProSuite, particularly around entity extraction. It's one of my favorite tools and components within the Provalis ProSuite. So I'm really happy to be here and to share this with you. I know we have a tight time frame, so we only have 1 hour. There's a lot that I'd like to cover, and so I do encourage you to store up your questions as we go along. I believe Tony will be capturing those questions, and we'll try to take as many as we can. I also want to thank all of you for taking your time to be here. Particularly, I see my colleague and co-author and collaborator, Professor Nanette Levinson. Hi there, Professor Levinson. And I know a number of other people are joining us as well. So today I want to talk just a little bit about how to use some of these very exciting techniques and how they fit within the broader context of data science and data analytics. We'll talk about some of the key approaches to text mining and some of the tools that are available, and then talk about some ways in which you organize projects to take advantage of this. And I'll give you an example of using some of these tools in a project that actually is the subject of the chapter in the book that Nanette and I and Laura Denardis have coming out in the fall on researching internet governance, where we use some of these tools to look at the Internet Governance Forum from the United Nations. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Then after I talk about how to use some of these tools, I'll show you how to use them with a hands-on section in the Provalis ProSuite, particularly in QDA Minor and WordStat. So that's our plan briefly for this Lunch and Learn. But first, I'd like to know a little bit about who's here. So in the chat box, if you could just tell me if you are a faculty member or if you're a doctoral student or a master's student, if you've done any text mining, if you've used commercial software or open source software, and if you teach text mining or use text mining in your research. So I'd just like to look quickly and see what the responses are. So just put those in quickly. And I hope that we have a nice collection of all of these. I'm assuming that many of you are faculty members. I'm assuming some of you are in the private sector. Some of you may be learning how to use these tools. Let's see, I'm not seeing any come in, Tony. Well, I guess they're coming in, but I'm not seeing them.
I can see them. They're coming in. We'll try to get it so that you can see them.
Okay, I see one now. So
Okay.
some faculty use some MOOC. Okay, great. Some faculty members have using. Okay, they're coming in now.
Okay, good.
No prior experience. Excellent. That'll help me pitch the talk just about right, I think. All right, well, I guess those will keep coming in and we'll know a little bit more about who's here. So I've got 6 quick learning objectives for you for this. I'd like you to be familiar with how text mining fits into data science, broadly speaking. I'd like you to be familiar with the tools that are possible for text mining. And in particular, I'd like you to understand some of the inductive and deductive techniques that we recommend when using some of these tools and how to apply them. And then in particular, how to use the entity extraction capabilities of the Provalis Pro Suite, and in particular, the topic modeling capabilities, and then how to roll all those together in a text mining project using the CRISP-DM methodology. I also, for the purposes of the recording, am providing you with some recommended texts. Those of you who would really like to increase your skills in text mining, these are some excellent texts that I would recommend. Some of them are generic around text mining, and some of them are specific to some of the work we do in R and programming in R. But overall, they would all be very, very helpful to you for those who are interested in learning more about text mining. So one of the reasons that this is such an exciting period is all around us, the idea of the information revolution is creating lots and lots of text for us to be able to use. So people are using mobile devices to send text, to send emails, they're sending social media posts, they're responding to videos. All of that text creates opportunities for us to be able to capitalize on all of that text-based data that's available, and many people don't use that data sufficiently. So when we think about big data, think about how these 3 V's that the Gartner Group came up with in 2001 around the volume, velocity, and variety of text-based data that's created. So the amount of data that is coming from our email archives, our published literature, our meeting transcripts, and the velocity, the speed at which that text arrives, and also the speed at which it decays. So if you think about Twitter posts, for example, that can come in hundreds and thousands per day, and then over time they become less and less salient. And also the variety in different types of text-based data that we have available. And text mining fits into a very nice ecosystem of data science where text mining can both contribute to and draw upon many of the various areas of data science, from data mining and statistics and machine learning, but also information retrieval and databases. All of this is quite useful from text mining and can be applied to a wide variety of business operations and applications. And you really have to think about what's important to you. What is it that you want to focus on in text mining? So we have 2 broad categories that we focus on as we think about text mining work, and we talk about them as inductive and deductive. Inductive approaches are really when we're exploring a data set. So imagine you have this huge data set of meeting transcripts or email archives or published literature. And what the inductive approaches are able to do is to say, what's here? What's interesting and important in this data set? What are some of the patterns, some of the themes that are there? So you can take an exploratory approach with some of these descriptive techniques and learn an enormous amount about that text-based data set. And we'll talk about keyword frequency analysis, phrase frequency analysis. We'll talk about entity extraction today, and really how do we do topic modeling and what named entity analysis is. But you can also take approaches that are more confirmatory, where you are being more deductive. You're asking specific questions. Is this concept in the data set? Are people talking about this issue that I'm interested in, or to what degree, and how does that change over the course of the data set? And so it's a really powerful addition to a toolbox of techniques that you might have in text mining. So how do you do text mining? There are a variety of tools. There are commercial tools. My absolute favorite in the commercial tool space is the Provalis Pro Suite. And just because Norman and Lita are here, I'm not saying that because they're here. These are good friends of mine. I came into contact with the Provalis Pro Suite when I was a professor at, I believe I was at Syracuse at the time, and I was looking for mixed methods tools. And the Provalis Pro Suite includes a combination of QDA Miner, which is a CACDAS tool, computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, WordStat, which is a text mining tool, and SimStat, which is a statistical analysis tool. So you have this mixed methods package all in one, but there are a number of other commercial tools as well. There are also open source tools. I mentioned R and RStudio. RStudio is the integrated development environment where you can program in R, and there are a number of modules that are text mining related modules in R and RStudio, and we can talk about that if anybody's interested. There are also a series of repositories that help you understand more about what text mining tools are available. And although a lot of what we do is statistical text mining, which focuses on what's called a bag of words approach, there's also some very powerful techniques in the natural language processing approach to text mining. And there are some libraries out there that help you do NLP text mining as well. And we can talk about those in detail. So when many people start a text mining project, and you look at these tools that are available in these techniques, sometimes people feel a little overwhelmed. And I like to present the CRISP-DM methodology as an approach to governing a text mining project. And this is this cross-industry standard process for data mining, and that's what the CRISP-DM stands for. And it's a way of thinking about a data mining project. And it has 6 steps. The first one is probably the most important overall. What is your problem? What is the purpose, or what is it that you want to know about a particular data set? What is it that you're trying to learn? And from a data analytics perspective, where we're trying to use these techniques to help us make decisions about next steps, we should be thinking about how do we analyze this data, or what problems or questions do we want to ask about this data, the answers to which might lead us to make decisions about our organization. And that's when we really get into the heart of data analytics. So the first step is determining the purpose, and then you want to see what data is available to help you answer those questions. And the best question available might be a moot point if you can't get access to the appropriate data. So you want to think about, is the data available? Then how do you prepare that data? Do you need to clean it? Do you need to reduce the size of the data set in some way? And then the fourth step is really developing and assessing models. So using some of those techniques that I talked about earlier and several others to then apply those techniques in appropriate ways to answer the questions that you posed in step 1. And then in step 5, you evaluate your findings. What are the answers to your questions? What are the implications of those questions? And then how would you deploy those results? What changes would you recommend? What policy changes might you make? What changes to data collection techniques? How would you implement the recommendations that you found? And then you can repeat. And one of the nice things about this CRISP-DM methodology is any step along the way, what you find in that step might send you back to a previous step. So let's say you start preparing the data and you start to say, well, this is really not the right data set, so you can go back to step 1. So it's a really nice approach to thinking about a data mining project. So let me give you a bit of a snapshot of how you apply something like that to a project that is, or to an organization or to a network that is near and dear to many of our hearts, which is the UN Internet Governance Forum. So this is just a little snapshot. We've written about this, and again, there's a chapter on this in our book that's coming out in the fall, already available on Amazon if you want to take a look at researching internet governance. So the Internet Governance Forum was established by the United Nations at the end of the World Summit on the Information Society. And I have another book called Transnational Advocacy Networks in the Information Society that really captures and studies that process. But at the end of WSIS, they created this annual forum to bring together key decision makers from various stakeholder groupings in internet governance. There have been 14 of these IGF meetings held from 2006 when we were in Athens, and I see Professor Levinson and I were together in Athens for that inaugural meeting, all the way up to last year in Berlin. And just a little note for anybody who's particularly interested in the internet governance side, this 2020 IGF is going to be online, and our Internet Governance Lab is going to be doing some virtual work to both prepare for and participate in the 2020 IGF. The IGF is guided by a multi-stakeholder advisory group, which advises the UN Secretary General, and it has a number of dynamic coalitions which bring multi-stakeholder actors around specific themes. It's an extremely exciting international conference. And although it doesn't make decisions per se, it's about regime formation. It's getting all these people together to talk to each other and to present ideas and to try to influence how the key global stakeholders in the world think about particular issues. Now, they made a decision to make, from the beginning in 2006, to make transcripts available from all of the IGFs. So all of the formal sessions, everything that's going on formally at the IGF, there are transcripts available, which make it a really, really rich data set. So we have been able to get 12 years of IGF transcripts. We just collected the remaining 2 years this morning, but I don't have those to show you. And so we're going to ask some really interesting questions about this IGF over the 12 years. And can we identify important themes and entities and issues using some of those inductive techniques? And can we ask specific questions like those deductive techniques that we talked about? And in particular, in this report, we look at cybersecurity in particular and the NIST cybersecurity framework using a categorization model, but we're not going to cover that today. We also want to highlight the importance of these techniques to internet governance research overall, because again, if you think about the email archives, the meeting transcripts, the published reports, all of these sources of internet governance debates and discussions become rich fodder for a text mining project. So in this particular project, we asked 3 research questions. And for each of these questions, if you go back to that CRISP-DM stage where you start to build models, you want to take those techniques and apply them to these questions and sub-questions so that you can actually answer these questions over time. So the first research question, what are the key themes, topics, and entities discussed at the IGF over its lifetime? So because we have various techniques, we break that research question up into specific individualized operationalizable research questions. So we take one technique to focus on key themes, another technique, in this case topic modeling, to look at topics, and another technique called entity extraction to look at the entities. So there are 3 separate questions related to that larger research question, and we use different techniques to answer each of those sub-questions. So we have a wonderful collection of transcripts, again, 1,020 transcripts. One of the really nice things about the Provalis Pro Suite is that it can handle importing data in a variety of formats. So it can handle PDFs, TXT files, HTML files. So whatever the files are, the format the files are in, even in multiple languages. So this is one of the key issues that people wrestle with sometimes, thinking that they can't. Now, luckily, the IGF is all in English, so this is what we're going to see. But many people hesitate because they think there are texts that they like to analyze, but they don't want to have to translate all those texts in advance. With these techniques, you can do the analysis and then have somebody translate maybe 10 or 15 or 20 words at the end, and you'll get a good sense of the findings that you're looking for. And we can talk about that as well. There's some very interesting studies that we've replicated to sort of prove that that point or explore that point. So we've been able to import those texts and analyze them in the Provalis Pro Suite. So there's some really interesting ways to be able to import those texts and create variables as you import them. So in this case, we created a demographic variable for year so that we would be able to compare some of these key findings over time, over the 12-year period. We can also apply things like stop word dictionaries or exclusion dictionaries to remove some of the words that are too common and appear too frequently in the data set. Now, let's talk a little bit about these two techniques that we want to highlight. So some of the common approaches that people, when they start thinking about text mining, are keyword frequency analysis. So how frequently is a word appearing in the data set? Now, we make some assumptions when we talk about this bag of words approach, is that if the people at the IGF, for example, are talking about something and the transcript is picking up the fact that they're talking about it, that it's important. It doesn't give a valence on it that says, well, it's a negative or a positive, but in that case, it's just they're talking about it. And so it was an issue that was discussed at the workshop or at the forum or at the IGF overall. So keyword frequency analysis is the simplest, but also still a very powerful technique. If you think about statistical analysis and you start with descriptive statistical analysis, that can tell you a lot about a phenomenon or a data set. And so keyword frequency analysis is helpful. And we have some techniques that we can use to give us a little bit more of a finer edge on helping us identify if it's important or not. So there's something called term frequency by inverted document frequency, which is a metric we can apply, which says if a word appears in with a great deal of frequency, but it appears across too many documents, then let's give it slightly less importance than if it occurs a lot in a fewer number of documents. But in addition to keyword frequency, phrase frequency is also important. So not just one word keywords, but phrases that can tell you a lot as well. And generally speaking, in text mining, those are called n-grams. So is it 2-word frequencies or 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams, and so forth. And again, one of the nice things about Provalis is you don't have to make those decisions. You can just look for phrases. You can decide, do you want to go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5-word phrases? You can do all that at once. But so those are important techniques. And then on the deductive side, those are other important deductive techniques. But today I want to focus on entity extraction. So with entity extraction, one of the things you can do is topic modeling. So you can identify in an automated way to identify what are important topics in this data set. I'm going to show you that in just a couple of seconds. Named entity extraction is also powerful. So take 12 years of data of transcripts and you say, now from the broader concept of entity extraction, and this is one thing that in Provalis that you can't separate out, but if you think about what entity extraction is doing, you can identify named entities, so persons, places, things, acronyms, countries, organizations. All those can be pulled out of this data set. And in Provalis, they're all in the same list. So you can identify what are the acronyms, what are the organizations, what are the places, what are people names, and so forth. So these are two incredibly powerful exploratory techniques. You're not saying, I want to go and see if Nanette Levinson's name is in the data set. You just look at the data set and see if her name pops out along with other people's names. So it's a really powerful technique. And you get a chance to, using these techniques, pull out some great data visualizations. You get to see who's across years. You get to look at other techniques like this hierarchical cluster analysis, and you can see within the data where clusters start to aggregate. So if you look in this first cluster here, you can see, for example, one cluster that looks like sort of a combination of sexual abuse maybe and violence against women. You see another cluster around infrastructure issues, and you can change the sensitivity level of these clusters as you go along. All right, now I have to stop my drawing tool here. I tried to get fancy. Let me erase these here. Erase all drawings. There we are. All right, so these are the techniques that we can use to go through using these topic modeling techniques. So for example, and I'm going to get to where I can show you, I can recreate this so you can see, but this is going back to 2008 all the way up through 2017, trying to identify the most salient topics. Again, this comes out automatically. And so you can see in 2008, there was a big focus on the IPv4 to IPv6 transition. There was a big focus on child pornography, enhanced cooperation, and freedom of expression. Now, for somebody who's not involved in internet governance, you might say, well, I don't know what those are. You know, they look like they could be interesting. But for those of us who study internet governance, we know that in 2008, there was a huge discussion about that the IPv4, the Internet Protocol version 4 addresses were running out. We needed the world to move to an IPv6 addressing scheme, and the fact that that was one of the core discussions in 2008 really jumps out at somebody who knows contextually more about this environment. All right, so let's look quickly at how would you do this in the data itself. So now what I'm doing is I'm pulling up QDA Miner. This is the first of the 3 modules in the Provalis Pro Suite. Now, I'm sort of old school. I've been using Provalis for a long time. And so, and I came to it from training in CACDAS tools, computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software like Atlas TI or NVivo, where you, the researcher, are looking at your documents and you're coding them. And that's what QDA Miner is. It's a CACDAS tool, allows you to import these data and then to do coding. However, this is not where, and that's still great, and we still use that in a lot of ways, but I became enamored about 14 years ago with text mining and the power of text mining. So even though I start my projects in QDA Miner and then move to WordStat, starting with WordStat 8, which is what I'm going to show you in 2 seconds, you don't have to do that anymore. You can start your projects in WordStat. You don't even have to go to the CACDAS tool anymore. Now, with that said, I still like it because look at what I have here. So on the left-hand side, I have cases. And so these are the years. And so I can open up each case and I can say I've got, you know, this is 12 transcripts from 2006. That's all they had available. And I can go all the way up to 2017 and I can look at all the cases, all the transcripts that are available from that year. I can look at any individual transcript if I want. So I can go down and look at that specific transcript. I can group these in a variety of ways based on which variables I've created. So right now I have them grouped by the year variable, but let's say you had different data types. Well, that'll take me, you know, anyway, you can create a very nice visual look at your data through the way you group them by particular variables. This year variable was the one I created automatically when I imported the data because that's going to give me a nice longitudinal look over time. So now my data is ready. I can create more variables if I wanted to, maybe like where the conference was held, and then I could maybe look to see if there was a relationship between the discussions that took place when the conference was in North America. Well, it actually hasn't been in North America. If it was in Europe, or if it was in South America, or if it was in Africa, something like that. So now my project is ready, and so I want to go into WordStat, and I do that through Analyze and Content Analysis. And so this is going to bring up WordStat 8. There's some options you have here. There are lots and lots and lots of options, which is one of the things that I really, really like about Provalis. It can be overwhelming, and so you can use some of the defaults that are available, but the more you learn how to use those options, the more you can tailor and tweak your project. So this is WordStat 8 now, and one of the things that I like about how Norman and his colleagues have developed this tool is if you look across the top, you see these tabs. And essentially those tabs allow you to walk through each of those techniques. And so you can just go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, and go through a very, very interesting analysis. They also introduce some two different modes. They introduce an expert mode and kind of a novice exploratory mode. And then the exploratory mode, it does a lot for you. I've been doing a lot of work recently on machine learning with a tool that lets me do automated machine learning. It's very, very powerful. It lets me test 20, 30 machine learning algorithms simultaneously on a big data set. It's phenomenal. But sometimes you want to not have it do all these things for you. And so sometimes you want to get more in the manual mode than in the automated mode. So in the expert mode, you can make all these decisions about what you want to do with your data. And I'm not going to go through this in detail. All I'm going to show you is you can pre-process your data. So when I talked about adding an exclusion list, or in the broader text mining community, what's called a stop word dictionary, you can take words out that you don't want to be included in your analysis. And so a typical English exclusion list, for example, is going to take words out that are used too frequently, like a, and, the, and so forth. So you can take those out with just a check mark here and there. Then you can start with your basic frequency analysis. So you want to see, so this is looking across all 12 years of those data sets. I could limit it and use a filter and only look at 2017 or only look at 2015, but this is looking across all 12 years of the data. I believe it's close to, let's see, some are excluded, so it's 960 transcripts that we're looking at right now. And I did do this earlier in case anything breaks down. I can show you some of the results, but let's keep our fingers crossed that the technology will work for us. And I will say, and Norman will like to hear this, I am running Provalis on my Mac, so it's a Windows-only software, and I'm running Boot Camp on my Mac. So it's not a virtual machine. It's giving me the full power of my processor to be able to run this. And so it works really, really well running Windows 10 on my Mac in Boot Camp. All right, so this has now come up for us, and we can see our, this is again, the most simplest approach, our keyword frequency analysis. So data, access, rights, online development, and so forth. We can apply this TF-IDF matrix and sort of reshuffle these just a bit. So when we apply TF-IDF, we see IPV, women, youth, ICANN, cybersecurity. So if you want to go from just looking at how frequently the word appears, you can do that, which is where we started. So data, access, rights, and so forth. Or you can apply TF-IDF and narrow down to other things that the algorithm helps you to think as important. On the right-hand side here, you can see some of these visualizations that you can program in. So you get a kind of a typical word cloud, which immediately tells you, some of the things that are important, human rights, data access, development. You can compare over time. So if you look at, we can select of our various variables, we can look at year, for example. Let's see, it doesn't like something I'm doing here. Something's popping up somewhere. The GoToMeeting is in my way. There it is right there. Okay, so year, and so it's gonna look at each of those words now, and we can look at them by year to see which ones are important. I guess I better get out of and move ahead to the topic modeling. Let's let this finish. And these are the times when this is a relatively large data set. So when we talk about big data, it's really it varies in terms of what we mean as big data, but this is close to 1,000 transcripts, which would be really difficult to try to read and answer these questions in a short period of time if you were trying to read all the transcripts by hand. So this is processing right now. It's at 18 million words. All right, so now we'll be able to look year by year. Well, I shouldn't have gone down this little rabbit hole here. Okay, let me just stop this. You can look at it year by year there. So let's move to the extraction tab. So remember I told you you can walk across the tabs here. So with the extraction tab, you get 3 options that I think are really important. One is this is where you get your phrase frequencies or your n-gram. So if you want to look at phrases, this is also under the extraction tab. So again, you're looking at 12 years of transcripts, and let's identify what are the most frequently used phrases now across all 12 years. Now, there's so much more you could do with this data. If you go back to the CRISP-DM and you want to separate out by, at some point, IGF started identifying the speakers in the transcripts. So if you wanted to see what somebody like, say, Bertrand de la Chapelle, one of the key participants in this process, what did he say over time? Or if you wanted to do a little bit of coding and have the documents be each individual segment of who was talking, you could see if civil society said more of certain kinds of concepts or the private sector said more of certain kinds of concepts, or if there was a regional variation or something like that. All right, so we're doing the extraction. And again, when I did this morning, it was much faster. Could be that my video is slowing me down. So so I'm not going to click on this right now because I want to get to the last 2. But if we clicked on phrases, then we would see, and if we have time at the end, I'll go back to that. But we would see 2-word phrases, 3-word phrases that are important in the data set. But I want to quickly show you the 2 other tabs here. So you have the topic modeling and the named entity extraction. And let's start there. So what happens with named entity extraction? So this is able to look at a data set, and it uses an algorithm that essentially tries to identify within the data set what are named entities. So think about a data set and think about how proper names and proper nouns are identified. They're going to be capital letters, maybe 2 words that are capitalized, or 2 or more words that are capitalized that follow each other at the beginning of a sentence. A series of capital letters could be an acronym. So there's a whole set of rules built into the algorithm to identify named entities. And so we can click that and have the software look across all 12 years of data and pull out all the named entities it can identify. Now, again, with some of the other tools like in R, you can use a specific package to identify places, monetary units, and so forth. In Provalis, it's going to give you a nice list of all the named entities. So IGF is an acronym, Internet Governance Forum. ICANN is another acronym, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Africa is a place, another named entity, Internet Governance. ICT, so acronyms that, you know, again, those of us who work in this space are very familiar with these names. But you can also find people's names. And so you can create a list. If you just go down the list, you'll see, let's see some of the first names that start to pop up. So you see South Africa, you see countries. There's Wolfgang, that's a name that we recognize. So there's some first names here, Jeremy, Wolfgang. In some places you start to see it talk about 2 name phrases and so forth, the European Parliament, the US government. So these are all named entities. Now, one of the nice things about this as well is you can take these named entities and create a categorization model from these named entities. So now you can use those and go back and search and see if, let's say you found the name like European Parliament. You can see if that's used more frequently in certain years than other years, and so forth. But now let's go to the topic modeling tab. So what topic model, there's a couple of different ways, or a number of different ways that the text mining community does topic modeling, and it seems a little bit like magic. I'm going to tell you two ways. One is called LDA, latent Dirichlet allocation, and another way uses sort of factor analysis. So those of you who understand statistical analysis, you can take a data set and you can run a factor analysis on that data set. You can see which variables gather together on one factor, and then statistically there's a relationship between those variables, and you have to take your insight to try to figure out what does that variable, what does that factor represent? What are those four variables that might have gathered together on factor one? What's the higher level abstract concept that that might represent? So we can do the same thing here. We can say, let's request 13 topics, and the software is going to look at all 12 years of data and see if it can find 13 topics that are words and phrases that are used that might cohere in some way, and then that's going to load on a topic. But unlike factor analysis, where it's just going to tell you these 3 or 4 variables loaded on a factor, and you have to interpret what it is, because it's running the statistics on words, it's going to give you a word to identify what it thinks the factor, or in this case, the topic, represents. So let's ask it to create 13 topics for us. If it can't come up with 13 that it thinks are coherent, it might give us 9 or 10 or something like that. And this is the last thing, and we'll open it up for about 15 minutes of questions. Okay, so it looks like it found 9 for us. So again, if people like Nanette and I know this community, we can probably start to identify what we think might be the topics. But if you didn't know anything about this data set and you're running this technique on the data set, and let's see if this is going to identify what Nanette and I would consider to be interesting topics out of IGF. So the big reveal here. All right, let's see what it found. And believe me, it normally goes so much faster than this. I don't know if it's this GoToMeeting that is slowing it down or what, but it's working. Oh my, it's on 2 of 9. Okay, it's moving faster now. Okay. All right, here we are. So it looks like it's given us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It did give us 13, so it gave us 13 topics. So one topic is Latin America, one is human rights, child protection. This is a person named Andrea Sachs, who happens to be the chair of the Dynamic Coalition on Persons with Disabilities, so that's another topic. Marcus Coomer, again, those of us who know this community know how important Marcus is. The multi-stakeholder model, another topic of domains, data protection, law enforcement, sustainable development and a digital economy, service providers. Bertrand de la Chapelle gets his own topic. Hong Kong as a topic, and Olga Cavalli as a topic as well. These are people that, again, we know the role that they play either on the MAG or in moving between multiple stakeholder groupings. And these are some of the keywords and phrases that are a part of that topic. And so then you can use this and you could identify these are topics. You can see if those topics are changing. over time. So look over here on the right-hand side, you can see that Latin America was used a lot in 2011, not as much in 2008. And again, this is not phrase Latin America, this is a topic. These are various phrases that were included in creating this topic of Latin America. Let's look at disabilities. So we can look at, this has been consistent. So this is across all years. Andrea has, and the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability has been pretty consistent across all 12 years of the IGF, with a little bit more of a focus in 2011, a little bit more in 2009 and 10, but pretty consistent. Domain names, heavier at the beginning of IGF than at the end. Sustainable development, relatively consistent over time. Human rights, let's look, I think that also has been pretty consistent. So these are just some of the ways that you can use entity extraction and topic modeling in a big project like this. And Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you to help moderate some of our questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Derrick. That was very informative. We have a few questions already. One of them, that slide that you showed at the beginning, you don't have to go back to the slide, but if you can remember, because I'm sure you have this at the top of your head, but can you suggest a good reference for text mining?
Yes,
absolutely. If there was one reference that you would suggest, or two references which you would suggest, what would they be?
Sure, I don't mind going back. So so these are texts that really give you both a theoretical grounding and a technical grounding in some of the concepts of text mining. So there's practical text mining and statistical analysis. That's a really good one. This text mining for qualitative data analysis in the social sciences. These are both going to give you a general theoretical and technical understanding of text mining. They have some nice labs to work on and things like that. All of the others are going to start to take you in the direction of doing this in R. So they're going to help you teach you how to do programming in R and how to use RStudio as an IDE and so forth. But these first two are very good grounding texts for understanding text mining.
Okay, thank you. I forgot to mention, everybody on the who's listening, if you have a question, use the chat feature at the upper right and send your question in, and we'll try to answer as many as we have time for. But we have a few to go, but please send in your questions. Can you just quickly, Derrick, you mentioned it in the presentation, but could you quickly go back and tell us just what TF-IDF is?
Yes, so TF-IDF is actually term frequency by inverted document frequency. So it's a heuristic that we can use to try to give a finer point on what words or phrases are important in a data set. So the first concept of what's important is that if people are using the word or phrase a lot, it's important. It doesn't mean that they support it or they don't support it, or there's no valence on it, but it's important because it's being talked about, it's being used. So if you had a you had two people that are talking, and you had a transcript of what they were saying. If research methods, the phrase research methods came up a lot in that transcript, you would think that this conversation was about research methods. And then you might say they talk more about statistical methods or case studies or whatever. You'd be able to discern that through keyword frequency analysis. But if a word appears too much, it loses some of its strength, because then it might be an artifact either of the data collection, like this is the Internet Governance Forum. So if IGF is appearing, is going to appear very frequently. So it's still important, but we might want to look at some other phrases that are words or phrases that are important that are not appearing as frequently as IGF. And that's where the term frequency which is the frequency with which that term or phrase appears, by inverted document frequency. So the more frequently, the more documents it appears in, it's still important, but it loses some of its importance. So it sort of moderates the impact of frequency of that word occurring when we use that metric or that heuristic of TF-IDF.
Okay, thank you. Another question, why use WordStat instead of R, or rather than R?
So I use both still, and there's some really good reasons to use one or the other. So WordStat is a phenomenal package, particularly with the integrated 3 modules all in one. It has pull down menus, as you can see. It's very visual to be able to, so that you can visualize what you're doing, and you're not doing any coding. So if you don't know how to code and in any language, and you start moving into trying to code in R, it's going to be very difficult for you. And so it's very, very fast to do this in Provalis once you learn how to do it. Another thing, for example, and I highlighted this at the beginning, and it gets very frustrating to me. So these transcripts from IGF are in, some of them are in text format, TXT format, some of them are HTML, some of them are PDF, all kinds of different formats. And Provalis can import all of them at once. If you're doing this in R, you have to import the TXT files first, then you have to import the PDF files, and you might get some errors. You have to import, so each one separately. Then you have to try to build a corpus. Can you do it? Absolutely. Can you replicate almost everything you can do in Provalis in R? Absolutely. Can you do more things than you can do in Provalis? Absolutely. But it's very, very difficult and challenging. And so even somebody like me who can program in R, and I can make R do almost anything I want it to do, I still use Provalis, particularly when I'm working with teams and groups and we want it to be visual, we want to work on it together. It's a very, very powerful tool for that perspective. Now in R, one of the nice things is that you're writing a script, you're programming and writing a file that can be shared and replicated very easily. And that would be a nice feature that if that could be built into Provalis somehow, like if you use SPSS, when I learned SPSS, the Statistical Package for Social Sciences, I learned it with the pull down menus. My wife, on the other hand, she uses all the syntax. And so syntax is like coding in SPSS almost, and you can share that syntax file and you can recreate it. I don't think that there's any way to have a syntax file like that in Provalis, which would be useful, because in R you can share that script and people can replicate your project.
Okay, well, we'll speak to Norma about that for future versions.
He's very responsive to ideas about new features.
Yeah, I think he's listening, so I think he's probably making notes about that. Can you tell WordStat what topics to look for?
So that would be a different approach. So this topic modeling is an automated process. So you can't tell it what to look for. If you wanted to look for a certain topic, I would recommend creating a categorization model. So a categorization model, the generic term is a dictionary, which you can do in Provalis or in R. And here's another advantage. So in Provalis, you can very easily build what I call complex multi-level models. And that's why I still use the term categorization model, because it's very evocative. In R, it's hard to do that. You can build dictionaries, but it's hard to get down multiple levels. So and I took those slides out, but with a categorization model, you would look at the big categories that you're interested in. So Anthony or Tony, you're saying tell it what to look for. I want to look for these categories, and the way you would build a categorization model is to say, if they were talking about this category, these are the words and phrases that they would use. If they were talking about this thing that I'm interested in, they would be using these words and phrases. And so you can build it like a quick and dirty version, or you can take a long time and build a categorization model. I'm happy to talk about that or give another workshop on that one day. But once you have a categorization model, you can then apply that categorization model, and you can have it look for words, phrases. You can build in rules, so you can say when this word is used, but not when this other word is used. So you can have negations like that as well. And then once you have that categorization model, now you can say, go and look in the data and see if that's there or not. So in the study that I was talking about, I did that, and I built a categorization model around the NIST cybersecurity framework and its multiple categories and sublevels and so forth. And then I applied that to see the extent to which the NIST cybersecurity model was there or not. So that's one way. Now, with this topic modeling, you can actually use this to build a model. So you can use these categories and create a categorization model from these categories right here. So you can use this to build a categorization model and then apply it in that way to see, is what I'm looking for there or not.
Okay, thank you, Derrick. I've got another question, and that question was asked by Emmanuel. And Emmanuel, you can go to our website, and there is a webinar on building categorization models and building dictionaries. So you can go on our website and see and practice in more detail what Derrick is talking about. But also, we'd like to have you back later, Derrick, to do that. That may be another lunch and learn in the weeks or months to come. We have a question, one other question here. We have other questions, but the next one is, can you share experience and interpret and further analyze the topic modeling results? For example, make some sense, but some not, and some make
Yes.
sense, but some don't, but are too general. How do you conduct further analysis?
Absolutely. So once it identifies the topics, and I think we were asking for 13, you might ask for more or you can ask for less, and you can then look at them and see, does that make sense as a concept? If like again, like Professor Levinson, who is familiar with this environment, would be able to say, yes, I think this is a topic that is makes sense within this community. And so then you can create, and I just lost it, I just closed it, but then you can create a categorization model from that topic if you want to explore the words and phrases that it used to make up that topic, and you can do that as well. Now there's another tool that I like, which is the cluster analysis, and I think I can get there quickly. And this will give you this co-occurrence matrix here. And so this is going to give you words that are used close to each other and recommended clusters of concepts that are in the data set as well. And you can expand and contract how close those concepts are. And you can really, so again, think about this as exploring a data set that you don't know very much about. And you can really start to identify, wow, you know, this data set, you know, talked about, you know, all of these key concepts. But yes, you can use what the topic model identifies, what the topic modeling process identifies for further analysis. You absolutely can.
Okay. Are we going to just let this come through here to
you can ask it. Yeah, you can ask the next question, I guess, while it's.
Okay. Did you double check the entities found with the factor analysis by qualitative analysis? And if yes, what differences did you find?
So you can, and so depending on the size of your team and the amount of time that you have, you can go back. And one of the really nice things about using Provalis, and again, I'm not saying this because Norman is here. I would give you exactly the same feedback. It is so easy to look at the context for any of the keywords or phrases. So there's something called keyword in context. And so and it's built, so Norman is a researcher himself. So as he built the software, he was building in a way that gave him things that he needed. And so if you're looking at a phrase and you want to look at all those phrases in context, you can do that, and then you can say, okay, many of these are using that phrase the way I expect it to, but every time it's not used appropriately, it's because there's this other word that's there. And so now you can say, when this phrase occurs, but this word occurs, don't count that. And so you can, if you have time and if you have your team that is trained to be able to do this, you can continue to tweak and tweak and tweak and refine your analysis multiple times over. But this just shows you, Tony, what I was just waiting on for. So you can see these clusters here. So you see this blue cluster, you have, and so if you read this from left to right, these are two words that are appearing very close to each other. So abuse and sexual. So you understand that's a concept about sexual abuse. And then look at what's the next thing that's associated is this word child. So there was a discussion about child sexual abuse. And then look at the next thing that it was about, which is images. So this was a discussion at some point in IGF about probably child pornography. So images of child sexual abuse. And somebody called John. So we don't know why John's name is associated with this cluster, but we could go back and find out, you know, what was going on with John. You know, he could have been the one who was presenting something on this, or maybe had a lot of comments to make. But you could absolutely follow up on looking at that in context by looking at this keyword retrieval, for example, and find out what was being said at that point.
Okay. Okay, there you go. There's the keyword retrieval. Okay, Derrick. Well, thank you very much. I think we're basically out of time. And thank you to everybody for participating today. We really appreciate this, Derrick. We have recorded this session, and we will be posting it on our website later today or tomorrow. Our next Lunch and Learn is scheduled for next Thursday, June 23rd at the same time, 12 to 1. The host will be Cesar Cineros Puebla, and the title will be QDA Minor in WordStat, from Analytics to Data Mining. The presentation will be given in Spanish. You can register on the Learning webinar section of the website. And do you have any final words before we sign off, Derrick?
Sí, gracias, Tony. Es muy importante para esta investigación en español y otras lenguas también. Y yo quiero participar en la otro programa en español también. I want to participate. I think it's important that we do this in multiple languages and that people can see that. And I would be delighted to answer any other questions that people might have. Feel free to reach out to me by email or on Twitter. Happy to talk to folks about what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Your Spanish is way better than mine. I won't even try to respond to that. But you can see here that Derrick's contact information is on the bottom of this slide. His information, if you can't write this down right away, again, this will be recorded and posted. But his contact information is also available in the training section on provalisresearch.com, and that's always there, and that's easy to find. So again, thank you, Derrick. Thank you, everybody for participating today, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.